with the system, always all alone. I'm in love with the system, never going home. I'm in love with the system.
According to CBC News, in Toronto, police were called in as groups of pro-Hong Kong China protesters clashed in Toronto. This was back in August 17th of 2019, and this is something I've been meaning to do for the past month or so. For anyone who's been living under a rock and don't know, Hong Kong has been protesting an extradition bill and a government crackdown by police for the past 3 months. Started in June, and it's been going on pretty strongly up until now, September. The extradition bill was a bill that would allow the Chinese Communist Party to extradite suspected criminals from Hong Kong to the Chinese mainland to face trial. That could be broadened to include dissidents or democratic activists. And a lot of people are afraid of that because then they would simply disappear and no one would ever hear from them again. And the Chinese courts on the mainland are not exactly known for their leniency or understanding, as there is a 99% conviction rate in Chinese courts. In Chinese courts, the law is whatever the Communist Party decides it's going to be. So this is what Hong Kong is protesting. They're also protesting the fact that the police have been pretty violent at times. There's been a lot of tear gas and rubber bullets shot at them. The communist government also sent in triads, which are gang members from the mainland, into Hong Kong to stir up trouble. Some protesters have been beaten. There's been a few that were arrested. There have been claims that protesters have also caused some damage. When you have hundreds of thousands of protesters on a weekend basis, as many as 1 million people even protested for this, you're going to get some kinds of acts of violence, unfortunately. So anyway, this has spilled over to Canada and other Western countries where there's large Chinese populations. So a few hundred people gathered outside Old City Hall on Saturday afternoon, August 17th, with the intention of marching around the Eaton Centre in solidarity with protesters in Hong Kong, are in their 10th week of advocating for an extradition bill to be withdrawn. Now, the bill has been withdrawn, but it hasn't been completely shot down yet. It could still come back on the table. It's something that the Chinese Communist Party is pushing for the Hong Kong legislative to do. Gloria Fung, one of the organizers of the march and president of the Canada-Hong Kong link, said that when they arrived at Old City Hall, they were met by members of a pro-China group who was chanting "One China" and was blocking the protesters from leaving the area. The pro-Chinese protesters do not have a permit to stage this rally here, and they're only here to jeopardize freedom of expression, according to Fung when she talked to reporters. And in Canada, we show zero tolerance to this kind of intimidation and harassment. This is nothing new. Whenever there's a protest that the Chinese Communist Party doesn't like, directed towards them, they will mobilize their own people, usually young students or business leaders who have strong links to mainland China, to organize counter-protests. This was also reported on CTV News, and you can see that the protesters are also calling for Carrie Lam, the head of the Executive Council in Hong Kong, to step down. I don't think she can step down. She's caught between a rock and a hard place. The protesters wanted her to step down, but the Communist Party does not. They haven't exactly requested it. And until they give the go-ahead, she's stuck. So again, this article says basically the same things. They're calling for the resignation of Hong Kong leader Carrie Lam, democratic elections, and an independent investigation into police use of force. Now, there has been allegations that some of the volunteers and organizers were attacked in the clash. However, there's been no confirmation that anyone was physically injured. Probably a lot of pushing and shoving and tearing down each other's posters. Now, this has also spilled over into other areas of Canada. According to the Chronicle Herald, back on July 31st, the Hong Kong protest spilled over into the Simon Fraser University campus. Now, what they have, and a lot of other universities have around the world, is they have what they call the Lennon Wall, named after John Lennon. And basically, people can go up to this Lennon Wall and post Post-it notes or any other kind of literature supporting the Hong Kong protesters. And what's been going on is that some pro-China activists have been going around tearing up these walls. They've destroyed the walls, and in Simon Fraser, the original Lennon Wall was repeatedly destroyed and rebuilt with post-it notes taken down, and now they've moved it to another location. They were going to have a third wall, but plans for that were also scrapped after assessing the security concerns. So basically, any pro-Chinese supporters do not like to see anything that looks bad against their country. The Chinese Communist Party would like to keep a lid on this, but because Hong Kong still has a freedom of press and journalism there, it's really hard to keep this one quiet. Like I was saying before, anytime the Chinese Communist Party does not particularly like a particular subject, they will go after that. And that happened before in Canada. I covered this before, and this is from a National Post, where a Tibetan Canadian student, politician, and Uyghur rights activist came under fire under attack by Chinese students in Canada. And like I said, anytime there's something that Beijing doesn't like, they're aided by thousands of Chinese citizens attending universities here. So they're mostly young people from mainland China that the Communist Party keeps track of through their consulates and embassies and other functions. And they rally the support of these students to help protest or meet an agenda. So this student politician, Jimmy Lamau, became the student union president at the University of Toronto. And the mainland Chinese university students created a petition and made threats against her. And it's at least partly the work of Chinese diplomats. This poor student, she claimed victory at the student union president for the University of Toronto's Scarborough campus. As soon as she won, a petition went around demanding she be removed from her post, and she's had a torrent of online abuse. All of them appear to be Chinese students insisting her long-standing advocacy for Tibetan independence was irrational and made her ineligible to represent the student body. Okay, meanwhile, she was democratically elected. Some of the posts simply wished her to die or be raped. And one even says, why we elect a person who don't love her own country? Well, 11,000 petition signers. Even though this activist student is actually Canadian. 11,000 petition signers. I didn't know there were that many Chinese students at the University of Toronto from mainland China. So obviously, it's not real. They're just using false names through multiple accounts. It also happened in Hamilton, where a coalition of Chinese students groups protested a talk Monday at McMaster about well-documented human rights abuses against China's Uyghur minority. For those who don't know, the Uyghurs are a ethnic Muslim group in the western province of Xinjiang in China, and the Chinese have put about 1 million of them in concentration/detention centers, and it's called re-education camps. At the same time, somewhere numbers vary between 100,000 and 1 million Han Chinese from the coastal regions have been volunteered or drafted to go live in the Uyghur Muslim homes, basically to spy on them and to report any wrongdoing. While the Muslims are getting persecuted in China, the Muslims around the world don't care. Go figure. And this is an example of China's soft power efforts. There's Confucian institutes based in many Canadian post-university secondary institutions, and leaders of the Chinese Scholars and Students Associations at most of the schools too. In the Confucian Institutes, New Brunswick got rid of theirs, but Edmonton still has theirs. And in these institutes, where you learn about China, you're not allowed to talk about Falun Gong, you're not allowed to talk about Tibet or Taiwan or anything else that the Chinese Communist Party deems to be. This is another way how the Chinese Communist Party infiltrates Canada. So according to the South China Morning Post, back on July 6th, there were Canadian ads that blasted the Hong Kong radicals invoking blood loyalty to China. But the 208 Canadian Chinese groups that were signatories to recent newspaper advertisements in Vancouver denouncing radical Hong Kong protesters may also have included groups linked to the Chinese government's United Front work, its overseas campaign of influence and outreach into the Chinese diaspora. They include dozens of Chinese fraternal organizations, business groups, and even clubs. Now, they are also opposed to interference of any foreign forces, calling the Hong Kong unrest an internal affair in China. However, in Canada, we all have the right to express our views. The advertisements were placed by the CBAV on June 21st and provoked a sharp backlash from diaspora Chinese who supported the protesters, pushing a long-standing difference over Hong Kong's fate into the spotlight of Canada's mainstream English-language media. Now, Canada has 1.8 million people of Chinese ancestry. That makes them the largest non-white ethnic group. In Vancouver alone, there are 500,000 people claiming ethnic Chinese heritage. It includes 188,000 mainland immigrants and 72,000 from Hong Kong. So some of the ads say that as an ethnic Chinese and overseas Chinese Canadian people residing in Canada, some of the ads say that as ethnic Chinese and overseas Chinese people residing in Canada, we all belong to the same Chinese nation based on the idea of blood being thicker than water, patriotism and love of our homeland. We are obliged to unite with the Hong Kong residents and not be taken advantage of by separatist forces. Really, you moved over here, get away from that. That's what Canada is, a land of opportunity, a land to get away from all the bullshit from your old country and come here. Many are calling it a Chinese kind of democracy, and many young Chinese Canadians in Vancouver support Hong Kong's anti-extradition bill protest. Now, not all of them have connections to Hong Kong, but they do see the protest as a means of activism to seek democracy that is not framed in a Western way. Now, other ethnic Chinese people in Vancouver insist Hong Kong affairs are an internal matter for China. And in a way it is. Now, many feared the extradition bill that's being passed around would allow the transfer of fugitives to jurisdictions the city does not have the extradition agreement with, including mainland China, and would make it unsafe for them to visit the territory. So a lot of them are afraid of if they go back home after criticizing the Chinese Communist Party, if they go back home to Hong Kong or even the mainland China, they're going to be arrested and detained. And that happens quite a lot. Also, a lot of them still have family members over there, so that's why they're also fearful what they do and say may be picked up by the Communist Party and used against their families back home. Now, this one, according to the CBC article on August 20th, talks about how Facebook and Twitter busted a Chinese campaign aimed at Hong Kong. So Twitter said it expended 936 accounts, and the operations appear to be a coordinated state-backed effort originating in China. It said these accounts were just the most active portions of this campaign, and that a larger spammy network of approximately 200,000 accounts had been proactively suspended before they were substantially active. Facebook said it had removed accounts and pages from a small network after a tip from Twitter. It said the investigation found links to individuals associated with the Chinese government. Now, the Chinese Communist Party has a propaganda department spreading false information about what it does and what its activities are across the world. They consider the news and journalism as just another form of propaganda. Once Canada-Chinese relations have been at an all-time low ever since the arrest of Meng Wanzhou last December. And this Hong Kong issue has also exacerbated things too. Many Chinese Canadians from Hong Kong who do have family back home, and it's an area of concern. So China is once again issuing a warning to Canada after Foreign Affairs Minister Chrystia Freeland put out the statement outlining concerns over Beijing's planned extradition law. Canada remains concerned about the potential effect these proposals may have on the large number of Canadian citizens in Hong Kong, on business confidences, and on Hong Kong's international reputation, said Freeland in a written statement last June. Freedom of expression and assembly are the bedrock of Hong Kong's freest society. It's vital that any legislative preserve Hong Kong's high degree of autonomy, rule of law, and independent judiciary. You can see from the picture the protester is tackled by riot police. This has happened. When you have that many protesters and that many police, something's going to happen. Now, a few hours after she put that out, the Chinese embassy in Canada put out its own statement. Hong Kong affairs are purely China's internal affairs, it read. No other country, organization, or individual has the right to interfere in. Recently, some people from the Canadian government made irresponsible and erroneous comments on Hong Kong's Special Administrative Region, government's amendment to the ordinance and other Hong Kong affairs. This is rich. China regularly interferes in other countries' affairs. Just look at the Belt and Road Initiative and the debt trap diplomacy that they employ, as well as their forays into the South China Sea and even the Arctic now. China is becoming increasingly belligerent and pushy, and for years we've let them get away with it. Basically, the Chinese embassy is telling Canada to stop meddling in Hong Kong affairs. This is after Canada issued a joint statement of the EU defending the right to protest for Hong Kongers. We did the same thing just last week with the G7 summit. So under the current situation, the Canadian side should be cautious on its words and deeds regarding the Hong Kong-related issue. This statement came from an unnamed spokesperson for the Chinese embassy in Canada. Here's a look at some of the protests that have been going on since June. Now, Canada has been caught up in a diplomatic dispute with China since Canada's detention of Huawei Technologies CEO Officer Meng Wanzhou on a U.S. warrant in December. For those who don't remember, shortly after Meng's arrest in Vancouver, China detained 2 Canadian men who have not yet been released. And China has also blocked imports of some Canadian commodities, such as canola and pork. Meanwhile, they're buying up a ton of our wheat. We should raise tariffs on our wheat, make the Chinese pay more. Here's an interesting article from the Globe and Mail. So the Chinese authorities are taking aim at Foreign Minister Chrystia Freeland, singling her out by name in an unusually personal rebuke to her comments about Hong Kong. The targeted response from Beijing further highlights the breadth of the rift that has developed between Canada and China after the arrest of Huawei executive Meng Wanzhou, and the arrest in China of Michael Korvig and Michael Spavor. The government of the People's Republic of China is sending a strong signal of severe dissatisfaction and disappointment with the Trudeau government in general. So you read these comments that they make about her, how they're going after her, and then it becomes quite jarring to come upon the China section, which opens with bizarre, warm and friendly sentiments, talks about all the great economic opportunities that you can get in China, rather than China's actual economic blackmail of Canada. This was said by Mr. Mulrooney, who was a former diplomat to China, adding that the speech was silent on China's mass detention of its Uyghur people. The fact that we have 300,000 Canadians there which is almost 1% of our population. It's kind of alarming. I'm pretty sure they're not university students. They're probably business people, the odd teacher, or just Chinese Canadians. Chinese Hong Kongers with a Canadian passport. So this is an interesting article I found with the Expositor. Not sure where that one comes from. This is way back in January 25th, where they're calling Canada as a white supremacist foreign enemy, a sample of Chinese media's recent Canada bashing. Everyone always hides under the white supremacist thing, which is interesting because I've been to a place, I lived in Korea, and they're definitely Korean supremacists there. And I've also seen China, and they're definitely Chinese supremacists. You know, supremacists aren't exclusively white. You know, some of the stuff they come up with there, like the people of Canada are in revolt at their stupid government. We haven't had a revolution against government since the 18th, like a true revolt. Some of the things that they come up with are just amazing how stupid it sounds when you actually translate it. It might sound perfectly logical in Chinese, in Mandarin, but when you translate it to English, it just sounds totally stupid. Claims that the Chinese embassy in Ottawa is being barraged with gifts, condolences, and regretful phone calls. They were gratified to see that many Canadian people were imbued with a sense of justice, criticizing the Canadian government for its unreasonable behavior. If anything, the Chinese Communist Party has been the most unreasonable behavior. Their bully tactics are amazing. The West is trying to destroy Huawei because it's jealous. If Canada continues to confront China, it will pay dearly. Actually, no, China will pay dearly because companies will start moving out of China, which they've already have. They'll set up shop somewhere else, and all the manufacturing that China relies so much on will disappear. Unemployment will rise in China, and they'll have more and more problems to deal with. That's why one of the reasons for the debt trap diplomacy. What happens is China gives a loan for infrastructure projects in other countries, and guess who they hire? The Chinese companies that go in to start these infrastructure projects bring in Chinese workers. It's a big problem in the Philippines right now. They're not happy with that. In Malaysia, there's no Malaysian workers working on these projects. It's all Chinese that are imported in. Canada is a naive American lapdog abandoned by its allies. Chinese citizens are no longer safe in Canada. It's pretty amazing. Meanwhile, the Chinese arrested Spavor and Corby for purely political purposes. They were the two highest guys they could find. Meanwhile, Canada goose jackets are flying off the shelves in Beijing. Well, that's good to know. So for all this problem with Hong Kong right now, the Canadian government has increased travel warnings to both mainland China and to Hong Kong. So we increased the travel advisory for Hong Kong due to the ongoing protests in the city, advising travelers to exercise a high degree of caution. People have been filling the streets of Hong Kong since June 9th, angry over the proposed extradition legislative. Now, the US and Australia have made similar updates to the travel alerts, Ireland, Britain, and Japan having also issued travel advisories to their citizens. Like I said before, there are about 300,000 Canadians currently living in Hong Kong. The good news is that our government does have plans in place to assist Canadian citizens in Hong Kong. MP Rob Oliphant defends Canada's consistent strong response to the Hong Kong protest. Well, we're protesting just as loud as the Hong Kong ones are. We're not about to send a gunboat there, let's put it that way. Because we have so many Canadians living in Hong Kong, it goes without saying that some of them, or probably many of them, have also been joining these protests, or at least been walking in the crowds. What are the concerns of the government in Canada, and what plans are there if this should escalate? So Mr. Rob Oliphant says that when he came back from Hong Kong, he immediately asked the question to the Public Safety Minister, are we prepared to help Canadians if they are in a situation that becomes untenable for them? And the answer is absolutely, plans are in place. Now what those plans really are, we don't really know. They're not saying. I think it would be a good idea for Canadian expats to start leaving Hong Kong. My own personal opinion of this whole protest thing is it's not going to end well. The Chinese Communist Party cannot back down without losing face, and they've already lost lots of face over this protest and the fact that it's been going on for so long. Basically, they're hoping that it fizzles out, but if it keeps up its current head of steam, it'll never fizzle out, and they're going to have to send in more police or definitely send in the troops. If they send in the troops, then it could turn into another Tiananmen Square massacre. And that's something that the Chinese Communist Party really doesn't want, because it'll be very well publicized, and it'll make them look so bad, not in their own country but abroad. It will force other leaders to act and put more pressure on them. Already they're getting soldiers ready to go when things get out of hand. If another Tiananmen Square massacre does happen, I'm all for our Canadian government pulling completely out of China and setting up in Taiwan. But that's all I have on the Hong Kong protest. This has taken a long time. I've been meaning to do this for the past month. Let me know what you think about the Hong Kong protests, if you support them or if you don't, and what should Canada really do, realistically do. Let me know. I'd love to hear. Till next time, Roman Day Sweet, I'm out of here.